Today, speaking with Canterbury Cricket CEO Jez Curwin. You kindly set aside some time to talk about DA cricket within your region, and the catalyst for that has been that recent Canterbury Cricket proposal to invest in the redevelopment of Mainpower Oval in Rangiora. So, firstly, thanks to you, Jez, for sitting down and taking the time to speak. And before we crack on, I'll just have a little cover over of your story to date. So, you've been Canterbury CEO for just coming up to 7 years now. You moved across having been head of commercial operations with Somerset, and prior to that, you'd been with both Bath Rugby and Red Bull in commercial roles. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it does. Makes it very short. It's been a longer process than just that. But yeah, moved over here in November 2017 with a partner, a near 3-year-old and a bump. So that bump is now 6 and the 3-year-old is 9. So it's actually gone really fast on some things and really slowly on others. So, but yeah, no, it's been an exciting journey for the last 6.5 years, definitely.
And any signs of that 7-year itch coming up, or are you still expecting to be sitting in that seat for a while yet?
Look, there's always thoughts around what the next steps might be. But we, as an association, the team in the office and on the pitch, off the pitch, doing some awesome stuff. And I think most people would agree that sort of 2 years of the COVID times kind of almost took everyone away from the progress that they were focusing on from a work point of view. So it's almost like there's 2 years of a black, vortex that everyone's trying to almost catch up on. So yeah, arguably we're 2 years behind where we wanted to be. But we're still making some really good headway and progress. So it probably doesn't really answer your question at all. But no, there's still lots of stuff to do. There's loads of stuff to do, and it's ever evolving. So.
And coming out of those challenges like COVID and some of the other challenges that have faced the Canterbury region on and off the field, to be back in the black as of your last annual report must have been a nice little tick in the box.
Yeah, look, there's a point in time where you stop accruing funds, definitely, because if we constantly have years in the black, you kind of ask the question of what are we saving for? So yeah, we're looking at reinvesting now year on year for the next 3-4 years. So we actually had a big deficit budget signed off for this financial year, and it's not going to be quite as big as we'd originally forecast, but we're forecasting for a fairly sizable deficit budget because we've got things that we want to do. We've worked really hard as an association to put ourselves into a position of stability and solidity and financially that allows us to then now be comfortable to reinvest in the game. So, yeah.
And a good example of those things that you're wanting to do and wanting to go forward with, let's talk about that current positive story that came out in the news recently with the Mainpower Oval redevelopment. So what's your vision for that, and how do you kind of see that process playing out, and what benefits do you see for both Canterbury Cricket and for Canterbury Country with that one?
Yeah, look, I think it goes back to a general facilities plan. So we identified maybe 2-3 years ago that we didn't have enough facilities for the Canterbury programs as they're growing as well. So the men's program is pretty stable. There's a men's program, there's an A-team program, and that's where it is. The age group programs, under 19 men, under 17s boys, and then particularly the women's programs are going to get bigger, and they are currently getting bigger. So the Magicians, now that the new master agreement came into play a couple of years ago, they need to train more. They want to train more. The squad will get bigger. There'll be an A program on the horizon. The under 19 girls program, like the boys and men's age group programs, getting bigger. And so we just don't have enough facilities to be able to cope with that. Hagley Oval is an awesome venue. I probably quite biasly think that we've got the best ground in the country, but with that comes times throughout the year where we can't use it because of international cricket. So when we can't use Hagley Oval, we then have to have a second ground, and our second ground, and we're really lucky because we've got 2 grounds that are easily identifiable as our first class grounds, is Mainpower Oval. there is an element of Mainpower Oval that's still a community ground, because Canterbury Country still use it rightly for their Hawke Cup, their age groups, their club competitions, and then they have an obligation in their mind to allow club cricket, community cricket on there as well. So when you bundle all that together, there's not enough facilities for the teams to have decent grounds to play on. So Hagley Oval plays broadly 35 days of cricket a year on. Mainpower Oval's up to 65 days a year. And that in itself leads to the quality of the decks for the top sides probably not being where they need to be sometimes, particularly in the shoulders of the season. So we've looked at ways and means and other opportunities, and Mainpower is a great ground. So there was an idea of maybe developing something else, something new, but there's no real benefit to that. So the idea is to build a community oval out the back and move quite a lot of the cricket that's taking place on the main oval out to the community oval, so that the main oval can reduce from, say, 65 days of cricket a year down to about 40. And just simple numbers of less cricket being on there, the quality of the wicket for the top teams, including, the Hawke Cup side for country, will be a better playing surface. That's basically where it started. You then explore, what else do we need? We need more training blocks, nets, etc. Country do, the community does, and it becomes a bit of an obvious process to grow the general facilities there. When I first came to Canterbury Cricket, we were really split. So we had an office in Hazeldean Road, which is off-site. We used to train a bit at Hagley Oval, a bit at Mainpower Oval, gym sessions at a couple of different places around the city. So one thing that we want is that sense of being and of being in a home. So again, anything that we do at Mainpower Oval moving forward will be in partnership with Canterbury Cricket and Canterbury Country. So there's that sense of home. So we don't feel like we're transient. At the moment we pay a fee to play and train at Mainpower Oval. Well, we're actually looking at changing that model so that we're part of the whole environment as well. It would be basically our development hub. That's what we're looking at. So it'd be the home for our age group sides and A programs potentially, so they have that sense of being and that sense of place in the same way that we do now at Hagley, where we've got the indoor centre, we've got the oval, we've got the training nets. So it becomes a bit more of a sense of place.
Working through a project like what you've proposed for Mainpower Oval, as the bigger player in the picture, how do you try and balance your approach to ensure that you are benefiting both parties, that you're not kind of steamrolling over the smaller partner or kind of shafting the DA in that scenario?
Oh, well, listen, I think everyone's getting mutual benefits in this. We will be just purely from a financial basis. That's obviously the first one that people look at. We're working with Waimakariri Council, and they're putting it into their long-term plan. So hopefully, we're fingers crossed there's a funding proposal that will get signed off from them, and then it's about working together to plug the deficit, plug the gap. We'll obviously be contributing to the running costs because there'll be a sense of home off the back of a better ground or a secondary ground. Countries, teams get added benefits, better facilities themselves. So it becomes symbiotic, really. Otherwise, it's not our ground. So I think that's the really important thing. It is still Canterbury Country's home as well. It's where their office is. So we have to be mindful of that and work together to make a solution that everyone's happy with.
Take a little step backwards now. I don't want to go through too much of a history lesson here, but kind of historically speaking, going back, well over 100 years, Canterbury have had what can probably be described as the most complex relationship with their DAs of kind of the main cricket centres around the country. And when you came into the role, you did an early interview where you stated working with grassroots in a positive way is a significant ambition of yours. So now that you are a few years down the line into your role, how would you reflect on kind of how your relationship with the DAs has developed? Do you feel that there's a stronger dynamic between cricket and the DAs now than when you first came into the fold?
Yeah, I think it took a while to warm up. one of the first things that I had to do when I got into role was tell the districts that we couldn't afford to pay them their funding amounts for a couple of months, because we hit some real financial trouble that had developed a little bit prior to me coming on board, etc. So that started the whole relationship in a pretty rocky way. So I started in November, and I think in February I had to tell them we couldn't afford to pay them their funding round. So look, listen, I think like anything, and it comes down to communication, and that desire to communicate, and that desire to want to sit around a table and build that trust. There were definitely trust issues, and there have been, up until probably even now, but up until fairly recently as well. It takes so much time, and as you say, they've always had complicated relationships between the MA and the DAs, and the world is changing in terms of how things can work and probably need to change moving forward. And yeah, that was hard. It's been tough, but I think we've all come together in a pretty good way. In I'd say the last 2 years have been much more aligned in thinking and the desire to make sure we're still all here in 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. So.
And what sort of opinion have you come to hold personally around the roles that DAs play in cricket in New Zealand, obviously coming from a very outside perspective on that?
I think it's about understanding what the roles and responsibilities are between each party, and you could put clubs into this and schools. And I think there's still a very grey area as to understanding what people should be doing or can be doing or are doing. And I don't think people like having that conversation because it can be difficult. One thing that we've always said that the districts are incredibly good at is running cricket. So they run cricket bloody well. Yeah, they run club cricket really well. They do the draws, they get the games going, they do the administration, they do some really, really, really good stuff. But as the way that the game has evolved from a New Zealand cricket point of view, and the desire for New Zealand cricket to be really aligned to their strategy and their funding, that's where I think roles and responsibilities are changing a little bit. And New Zealand cricket's in their last master agreement conversations were very much around our community funding is aligned to our community strategy, which is very much about building up the participation and grassroots, the low level of the game. Consequently, they do provide that community funding to the major associations, and we have to follow suit. That's where it can get a little bit testy, because you start changing, the model that's existed for, 10, 15, 20 years, but that's the evolution that happens, because, things change in the way that we operate. And that's where it starts to get testy, because you need to be honest about where those roles and responsibilities are. And yeah, we probably, between us and Canterbury, didn't necessarily get that right to start off with, but I think we've got to a good space now over the last 2 years where we're all really starting to fit into what makes sense.
And when you talk about the DAs running cricket really well, one thing that, both in terms of researching into your region, but then also just, general conversations with Hawke Cup DAs and people that have been involved, is that every time they've had those from New Zealand cricket or the major kind of turn up on their doorstep and see how they're doing things, those people walk away with a mindset of, wow, we actually understand what you're doing. We get it so much more. We love what you're doing, that obviously from a distance they haven't seen as much. You've probably had a challenge with COVID over, a few of your years in charge with Canterbury Cricket. But when you first started, one of your first trips was over to Westport for the Buller Jubilee. Have you been able to be back across those parts to Buller or West Coast or down to Timaru or Ashburton much in your time so far?
Yeah, I probably go down to Timaru more regularly than over to the West Coast and Buller. We were actually over there. November would have been. We went over and we saw a couple of new teams, mixed teams playing, year 9s and year 11s maybe, or year 8s and year 11s, something like that, which was awesome because when we first came over, there was not a lot of cricket, particularly in the West Coast, going on. So, yeah, look, I probably don't go over there as much as I should do, 100%. But with technology allows us to communicate with your Brendans and your Kevins far more regularly than perhaps we had done in the past. So, and yeah, go down to South Canterbury definitely twice a year at least to catch up with the board. And Mark Medlicott, who's the GM of Mid and South Canterbury, Simon Hill, our GM of community, that they speak all the time. So there is a lot of connection going on between our districts and different levels of Canterbury cricket, not just myself, but various different levels. So, yeah.
And do you think that visibility of, getting there and seeing how things done does help to ensure you guys have a bit of a sense check on what's going on and a better appreciation for what is happening in those regions?
Yeah, look, I think definitely, just being visible, being accessible, and actually, picking up the phone and trying to talk to people, and that connection is really important. And as I say, maybe we've got it wrong at certain points where we haven't connected enough, but we're it's on our, even at the board level, to make sure that we are connecting at all the different levels through the system as often as possible. So,
and then touching on the big subject, funding for the DAs and for Canterbury cricket as a whole, Canterbury's obviously taken the step of wanting to take a very collaborative approach to agreeing on funding allocations, as you mentioned to me when we were preparing for our chat. So do you mind just touching on that and explaining how you managed to balance those funding priorities between the DAs, Christchurch Metro, and then Canterbury Cricket's operations yourselves?
Yeah, look, listen, I think the funding model that we had up until beginning of this financial year, so had been in place for 10 years, and there was always a prod to change it, but then coming up with the answer on how to change it was just because if you do one thing, someone somewhere is not going to be happy. So and so we just couldn't really ever get to that point of consensus. And as I mentioned, New Zealand Cricket very much changed their focus on targeting where their funding should be going to from a community point of view. So the pot of money that we get from New Zealand Cricket, they were very focused on this is what it's going to go for. It's got to be aligned to our strategy. And the way we were providing funding wasn't going that way, wasn't changing. So wasn't ticking that box. So we spent probably 10 months sitting around and understanding roles and responsibilities currently, what future roles and responsibilities should be between the MA and the districts, and then building a model around that, what that model would then cost and how that would be funded, and what we could then do after that. So we got to a point where we've now got a centralized game development officer team of 6 that are employed by Canterbury Cricket, but they sit in the districts, the various districts. And the idea is that they work with the districts and Canterbury Cricket to deliver all the participation programs. We then have a participation manager who does all of the admin to remove that from the desk of the districts, because as highlighted, the districts deliver cricket really well. So if they deliver cricket really well, give them as much time as they can to deliver the cricket that they deliver really well to their community. So the idea, and look, it's year 1, so there's teething problems and going well here and not so well there, so we're learning. So that's the general idea. So Canterbury Cricket now, because of the requirements from NZC, sits on our KPIs to deliver those participation programs. So we've sort of taken that away from district responsibility. The flip side is that costs money. So we agreed a number of the model that comes out of the pot of money. We then have topped that pot of money up, and so there's an element of cash funding that goes to the districts to almost use, not as they see fit, but within reason, linked to the partnership agreements that we've got between the districts. Now, historically, we used to get, oh, we need more money, this district shouldn't get that, we want that, etc. So I actually got a bit fed up with our team being the ones that were being told, you know, why do they get this? So we sat down and we said, look, this is the scenario. Irrespective of what the quantum of money is, it could be $1, it could be $1 million. We want you as districts to come up with a percentage model, because they were asking us, how are you going to split this money? What's it based on? So we pulled together all the different metrics, player numbers, geography, geographical reach, number of staff, number of population density, all of those things. And we put it in front of the districts and we said, right, so that you don't come back in 2 or 3 years' time and blame us, we'd like you guys, between you, to come up with a percentage split that you're happy with between all the different districts. If you can't do that, then of course, 100% we'll step in and we'll come up with the methodology and the answer to how the money will be split on percentage-wise. But I can guarantee that someone somewhere won't be happy. But we'll have given you the opportunity. So over the next 5 years, we don't want any complaints. And you know, it took a little bit of toing and froing and a bit of work, but we all sat around a table a couple of times, all the district chairs and the GMs and everyone. And yeah, the districts came up with a percentage model that we now operate to. And then we plugged in the total quantum of money that is then split based on those percentages. So, yeah.
So then I guess it begs the question, how similar or how different was that result to what the funding model was prior to that?
Yeah, there were a few winners and a few losers, but not significantly. Not significantly. And the beauty of it was common sense prevailed and relationships allowed everyone to have some honest conversations. And, you know, there was an acceptance that, you know, you mentioned about West Coast and Buller, the number of participants and players that there are over there. There was an acceptance and understanding and agreement that we still have a responsibility to ensure that cricket's played over there. So proportionally, they probably get more than they are owed or deserve based on purely stats, numbers. But there was an agreement around the table that there's a responsibility in Canterbury to support them. So while they may be a couple of points up, someone somewhere's a couple of points down, because there's that responsibility of supporting them. So it was great. It was awesome. And, you know, it was just testament to everyone that sat around the table to go, yeah, we can do this. And as I say, the beauty of it is if ever there's a conversation around, well, we deserve or we should get more money, it's like, well, hold on, you came up with the numbers between you. You know, we took a massive step back, we facilitated the conversation, and it was great. So yeah, massive tick in the box for being able to have those difficult conversations, collaborating and being open and honest around the table.
So when you're talking about the districts that you have sitting around the table there, does that include Metro, or does Metro kind of operate separately to that?
No, Metro are included in that. Obviously, they're not technically a district, but we call them one of our districts. The same with CJCA as well, the Christchurch Junior Cricket Association, because they're actually two separate entities.
So I suppose doing it that way also helps in terms of helping Canterbury retain a little bit of independence there, because I think there's always going to be, and I think it has been the case in the past, there's a little bit too much of potentially, whether it's just optics or whether it's reality of kind of blending between Christchurch and Canterbury being too much of the same thing. So I imagine what there is kind of resolving that issue.
Yeah, totally. And I'm a big advocate of there being being a separate organisation to run cricket in Christchurch, because we're not Christchurch Cricket, we're Canterbury Cricket. And my feeling is that if we do it in Christchurch, we should be doing it in Timaru, and we should be doing it in Westport, but we can't because of geography. So if our head office was in Ashburton as Canterbury Cricket, I'd still advocate the same thing, that there's a separate organisation running local cricket.
And then part of what has come out of that as well is around, you know, shared services. You've mentioned the development officers that are involved now, but then also the shared general managers. So you've got one general manager between Mid and South Canterbury, and then Peter Devlin working with Buller and West Coast as well as Canterbury Country. How have you found that model operating so far?
Yeah, so Pete working over that way was from 2017. Canterbury Cricket introduced some hub model, and the idea was there'd be three sort of hubs: country supporting West Coast and Buller, Christchurch, and South and Mid Canterbury. But the reality is that we moved that way for Mid and South Canterbury because they're naturally smaller districts, and having two governance boards, politely, and they would admit there's probably they're very operational. And do you need to have two governance boards for two relatively small districts? And so there's just been this natural progression to simplifying the model. And part of that simplification is also on a staffing base. So we actually employ Mid and South Canterbury staff on our books at their request and as a partnership model, because it just takes some of the HR admin, all of that behind the scenes admin away from a board that is much more operational than governance. It's just one less headache for them to worry about. And that's that simplification of the model that we're working towards and progressing with the times of. It's much harder to get volunteers who can really dedicate a lot of time to, whether it's sport or any other kind of organization. The world is much busier. People are much busier. People have less time to commit to these things. So yeah, it's kind of a progression of conversations that have happened over time to make it easier to run the game of cricket.
And with the introduction of the new laws around what boards are going to have to comply with, makes those challenges even harder for those boards to be focused on cricket operations, isn't it?
Massively. And if we can take that away from, if we can take elements of the risk, and the risks are health and safety, compliance, policy, staffing, all of that kind of stuff, and payroll even, that's why Mark and Gilkey are on our payroll. It just facilitates life for people, because they do it. These people volunteer because they love the game, not because they love writing a policy on, how to use social media. If you're, or worrying about health and safety compliance, that's not why you get involved with cricket as a volunteer.
And again, touching on what you're talking about with the centralised kind of development officer program, one thing that I have heard from a couple of the smaller DAs is around how beneficial they would see further support in terms of coaching and coach development. They've acknowledged that it's there and it's happening, but they've said more of that would be one of the best things that could happen for them. So is that an area that you see, further strides hopefully being made in down the track?
Yeah, listen, we're constantly talking to our stakeholders and partners as to what works, but I think it's important to note that one of the clear things that sits with the district's responsibilities is coach development. Each of the districts, the hubs have got a coach developer. So Kieran, Tim, and Gilkey are the district's coach developers, and that's one of the KPIs that they've got in their funding agreement, that they look after coach development. So, of course, everyone wants more support, but comes down to whose responsibility it is. The GDOs will do that grassroots base level participation stuff, coaching parents to be comfortable and capable of delivering those really low level programs. But coach development, currently, and that might change, happy to review and assess, and Simon will be doing that over the winter, Simon Hill. So, but yeah, coach development sits with the districts to do.
So kind of summing up all those things we've talked about and looking, going forwards, how do you see Canterbury Cricket continuing to invest in and support the growth of the DAs, whether that's through funding or whether it's through other means outside of money?
Yeah, look, as I say, our pot of money, actual cash, is not going to grow particularly, that we can invest from New Zealand Cricket. We've got a stepped approach from NZC, so we know where the funding is. We've agreed an annual percentage increase for the districts, confirmed. So year on year for the next 3-4 years, we know exactly the percentage and the money that will go up from their grants point of view. The big opportunity, I think, is revenue generation. How can we sort of bring more money into the game? And you know, we're a bigger organisation, obviously, than the districts, and the districts are bigger than clubs. So how can we support and work together to grow the pie? Once the pie is bigger, people can get slightly bigger pieces, and that's where any extra support will have to come from. Noting that, you know, we've got different areas of the business that all want more support. So whether it be more coaches, you know, in the high performance side, or facilities we've talked about, or more game development officers, or you name it, you know, everyone's always asking for a bit more. So we just need to balance that out. But one area that we do need to put more effort into, more work into, that we're looking at is the women and girls space. So again, you know, we've gone through this process now twice with the districts. First of all, around our game development officers and the funding model. Then we did a strategy review. I think I was sort of mentioning just now around, we've moved away from a Canterbury cricket strategy, and we've moved to a strategy for cricket in Canterbury, which is it's a really subtle but important difference. And it means for the first time, everyone's working under the same umbrella in the same direction. And there's a philosophy around it that everything we do is for the best interests of cricket in Canterbury, not the best interests of cricket in country or Burnside or wherever it might be. You know, it's actually for the bigger picture thing, looking at it on the macro. So that's really, really exciting. The districts are massively involved in agreeing to that, working to the new strategy and developing it. And so we've all got the same goals, because there's so many opportunities. There's so many different things that we could all be doing. And one of the important things around a strategy is making sure that you're not doing stuff that isn't relevant, because there are just so many things we could be doing. And one of our pillars is women and girls. So again, adopting that collaborative conversation piece, we're currently going through to all of our stakeholders, or as wide as possible. So we've districts, clubs, we've met with some former White Ferns, our current magicians, you name it. So we're at schools, we're going out to stakeholders and just asking them questions, and having a conversation with them around, you know, what's the aspiration? What should be our focus areas? What are we missing? What would make the biggest benefit in 3, 5, 10 years time? And we're compiling that all at the moment, and then we'll come back and take out the themes and work with what they've provided us, and, you know, come up with some focus areas for us that's specifically around the women and girls space.
And this is a topic that you've kind of touched on, and particularly around how, you know, West Coast are probably getting disproportionately more funding than others because of the position they're in. But how do you see, you know, Canterbury Cricket being able to tailor that support to the different DAs, given the really big contrasts that you've got from, say, a Canterbury country that's a massive DA on a national scale versus, you know, mid and South Canterbury are somewhere in the middle, and then West Coast and Buller are truly at, you know, the tiniest end of the spectrum as far as DAs go, which I imagine means you have to, you know, take those differences into account when you're kind of tailoring your approach.
Yeah, definitely. But it comes down to roles and responsibilities. So we've now taken off the growth of the participation level of the game off the responsibilities in a way from the districts. Now it's we're joined together in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So the districts know the people inside the rope, as it were, you know, the schools, the clubs, the venues, etc., and we've got the staff. So that's where they have to work together. But the actual deliverables around that sit with us. And so by providing staff rather than a pot of money, it just makes that a bit easier. The cash component is then over to the district to kind of do as they see fit that's relevant for their individual district. And that's the kind of split model, because we're not saying that they can't do their own things, because you might as well have a fully centralized model then. You know, we can't say that we want to deliver club competitions, because actually we don't, because that's what they do really well, because they're on the ground, they know all the volunteers, they know all the clubs, they've got the relationship with the council. So again, why would we want to do that? We don't particularly, and we wouldn't be best placed to do it because they do it really well. So that's where it comes down to that individualized pot of money, as we mentioned before, there is what's called the SNPI agreement, which is the partnership agreement that it goes between New Zealand Cricket, the major associations, and the districts around what their deliverables are. And as long as that's kept in mind and that's aligned to strategy, then that's up to them as to how they operate.
And you talk about the DAs delivering club cricket really well. One of the big challenges with club cricket, and it's a nationwide thing, every major association has the same problem, probably apart from Auckland and Wellington, who are fortunate enough not to have any DAs. But for the other four, you've got that significant issue that you've got generally one significant base of operations for your major and inside your area. And for a player from South Canterbury or even mid Canterbury, Buller, West Coast, for them to be able to play for Canterbury, that's almost inevitable that they're going to have to move to Christchurch for club cricket. Canterbury country are probably strong enough on their own that that's not such a concern there. But for particularly those smaller DAs, do you see that as an issue, that proliferation of players having to move to the main centre to be able to play at the levels above?
Listen, we sort of talked about it prior to coming onto this. That's happening in life in general, for jobs, for work, for social reasons, for university, for a whole myriad of different reasons. And I guess sport in general, cricket in this case, is one of those reasons for it. The important thing for us is to make sure that our talent ID, as you'd call it, our understanding of the players of interest out in the regions is good enough and strong enough that we can identify players with talent. If that individual is interested in furthering their career into cricket because there's potential there, they enjoy it well enough, they see it as an opportunity, a career path, then it's about having those conversations about what's best for them. And unfortunately or fortunately, we are a centralized program in and around Christchurch because that's where the facilities mean that we can do it. We have got some players that have driven and do commute. It's not too bad from Ashburton. It's a bit harder from Timaru, absolutely. But that's not to say we had Izzy Sharp, who's captain of the under-19s New Zealand side in the World Cup. She's spent a couple of years, doing that drive, and it's a massive commitment. But yeah, we can't suddenly up sticks from our facilities point of view and move hubs down to Timaru and further afield. It's just not really a viable option. What is viable is for us to know that there are good players based in those hubs, schools, clubs, whatever, around the region, and provide them with the opportunity to be involved, albeit likely to be in Christchurch.
So then would it be fair to say that, I suppose, the responsibility, for lack of a better word, for Canterbury Cricket in that scenario is that ensuring that those talent identification pathways and processes are good enough that a player doesn't have to move to Christchurch just to be visible, that they can continue to play in their region, do well enough to get attention, so that it's at that point that they're looking at moving towards a career in cricket rather than being somewhere on the fringes, that it's at a potentially a later stage that a player does have to make that shift.
Yeah, look, definitely at that under-19 level. There's no that we would, unless they come to Christchurch for schooling, which does happen, so there are some big schools here that do pick up players. We are getting better at that identification of talent and understanding where it is, where it could be, and that's down to the network. And again, it's that conversation piece, that being visible, having someone that is aware of who are the right people to speak to then identify that talent. And we're getting a bit better. Well, we're getting much better on it, but there's always a lot of work that you can do on that. And again, comes down to resource. Do we have enough people on the ground to see all the people that we want to see? And the answer at the moment is probably no. But we're getting better at it. And listen, that's not to say that we will see everyone, because you do miss people. You miss people that develop late. There's all sorts of reasons why someone might fall through the fingers, but we hope that we don't have many that happens to.
And then looking at the representative level cricket for the districts, you've mentioned in our communications that Canterbury Cricket A play games against Canterbury Country. What else kind of goes on currently within Canterbury to ensure that the DAs are getting games beyond their zonal elimination games?
Yeah, again, that's part of that cricket hub that we don't specifically get involved with that. We do see that as a district responsibility. That's one of the reasons that arguably they generate their own funds and they have sponsorships. They've got the money that we provide them, etc. So we're quite focused on the funding that comes down from New Zealand cricket and the reason why that funding is in place, aligned to the strategic goal of growing the game at participation level. The cricket part of it, as I sort of mentioned, they do it really, really well. And it is then down to the district as to how much or how little they want to do around that representative side. Our role from the district side, is to identify those players that we feel have got the potential to play first class women's cricket. That's that process. But obviously there's that point in time where they play in both, Hawke Cup and somewhere in the Canterbury Cricket pathway, for want of a better expression.
Those rep games do give you more of an opportunity to identify that talent though, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and look, there's no doubt that Canterbury Country have got a strong Hawke Cup side, and they are obviously, there's blips on the occasional years that in the past, but generally would our A side obviously get something out of playing Canterbury Country, because there's quite a big crossover player there as well. So you'd have to identify what the benefit would be between a mid and a South Canterbury, and that's not for me to highlight. That would be for the high performance team to justify and to explain. And they may say, actually, the quasi under 19s A side would get benefit, but it also has to sit into people's schedules, diaries, playing windows to be able to do that as well.
So I suppose one of the things that I'd throw at you was from a central districts, living in the central districts region, seeing the Chapel Cup, and particularly speaking to players from, Marlborough and Nelson who play in the South Island zones but are part of central districts. That's quite a special occasion for them to all come together and play, what is just a one weekend of cricket, but they're all in one place playing cricket against each other, one day games. And Northern Districts do something similar. Since Poverty Bay have moved out of rep cricket, it's been a Northern Districts under-19 side that's been part of the Brian Dunning Cup, which is again a one weekend T20 competition. So, with development sides for Canterbury, with the Christchurch Metro Association and with the districts, would that be something that you'd want to consider looking at? Would be some sort of one day or T20 competition between those districts and sides?
Not at the moment, if we're being honest. Our Canterbury Cricket selection is through the programs that we try and identify through. So we do identify from that. We have groupings of players from under 15s, and we don't have rep sides under 15s. We start at 17s and then 19s. And so our feeling is that that's the program that we go through. So you won't get selected for a Canterbury through playing club cricket or district cricket. You might get seen and the opportunity to continue to play at a slightly higher level at the Hawke Cup side, but you'd transition into the A, and it would be the A program performances and the involvement in our environment that will get you selected for Canterbury Cricket, rather than from performances in club or district cricket. As we say, if the districts wanted support to help organise or bring together something like that, great, they're more than happy to have that conversation. But it wouldn't be a focus for us, because that's where we feel that the districts do a great job from the cricket side for their needs at their point.
So I guess this is potentially a question that you'd prefer to refer on to your high performance team, but one of those challenges with putting a lot of weight on that A structure, on the kind of A team and rep team structure, is that there are times that players probably don't feel as invested in an A team as they do when they are playing rep cricket for a regional or district side. So Do you think that there is potential for if there is more cricket provided to those DAs or to Metro to play against the districts or whatever else to put more weight on that than from what you're saying is currently the case?
Uh, yeah, currently it's not part of our thinking. It's not to say it won't be. Yeah, look, listen, I think that what we try and instill, and it's very difficult because you get an innings if you're a batter, or you're bowling and you've got your chance in the A squad. You want to make the best of the opportunity, but what we try and impress upon generally younger players is that one innings won't make or break your career at Canterbury Cricket. It's what you do around that. I'd like to think that our coaches are developed enough to not just base it on one match performance. It's based around a whole scenario of situations, trainings, and awareness and conversations built up over a period of time, rather than just that one performance. The flip side is the player, as it's your turn in the shot window, so you want to make the most of it. And if it goes really, really well, you go, yes, I've made a good I've had a good shot at it. And then you ask, well, why haven't I been picked? If it goes badly, you feel like the world's caved in, but actually it's not about that one performance. It's about a period of time you're involved in a program.
So, last question in terms of rep cricket at the district level. This is going back before your time again, so I'm not putting this on your shoulders, but there is obviously some bad blood that's existed at times with Metro and certain districts because of things that have happened in the past. Yeah. Have you made the attempt, or would you like to kind of facilitate more between Metro and the districts in terms of them, facilitating cricket against each other or working together more or anything along those lines?
Oh, listen, I'm not sure that either party particularly wants to massively. I don't think Metro or a Metro, they don't want to play in the Hawke Cup, for example, and I'm not sure that they particularly want a Metro team to play a district team. Yeah, again, I'm not the right person to answer the different levels of standard and quality, but historically club cricket in Christchurch has been really strong. And where would that sit in comparison as one of the clubs versus one of the the districts? I couldn't answer that question, but I guess where's the relevance? Where's the window to allow that to happen? Yeah, I'm not sure that there's a huge amount of appetite for it. There are clubs that play in the Metro competition from country, which is great. I think they generally play in Div 1, Div 2, maybe something like that. So that probably gives you an understanding of the level. There was a conversation a couple of years back around a T20 club comp, which nearly got over the line, but for one reason or another didn't happen. So I think that the districts and Metro between themselves are big enough to organise those conversations, really, if they want them. Would it be cool to see? Yeah, I guess it would be cool, because it means that they're talking and they're working together. So from our point of view, that would be the tick in the box, that there's that collaboration between each other, between themselves, between our districts to solidify the relationship. Is it a must do from a cricket point of view? It's not happened yet, so arguably not.
And you've been here close to 7 years, as we've said. You came in just after Buller had won the Hawke Cup very famously. Canterbury Country have held it a couple of times since then, with a bit of success at that level. And South Canterbury earned the challenge this year and acquitted themselves very well. So, in your time since coming in, have you been able to get an appreciation or a sense of the kind of depth of passion around Hawke Cup cricket within the districts and kind of what that trophy does mean to those teams?
Yeah, definitely. It's a national competition that people want to win. It's a bit like the Ranfurly Shield, that kind of excitement and buzz around and historical importance. So yeah, absolutely. It is clearly important for anyone that's involved in that level. And those Hawke Cup challenges are kind of, I would liken it to, it's that trip to Wembley as a football fan. that's what it is for some of these people. It's the pinnacle of what they'll achieve in the game, and all success to the players that play in that. Yeah, I think it's good to have those aspirations.
We'll leave it there for today before we carry on for too long chatting on. But thank you for taking the time to talk to us today and to really give us some insight into things from your perspective, and obviously the perspective of Canterbury Cricket looking after that region. So thank you for your time.
Oh, absolute pleasure, and thanks for hosting. And fingers crossed, I haven't said anything that's too controversial. I guess my inbox will determine that over the coming weeks. But yeah, no, it's been good. Thank you.